Hey, what's up guys? My name is Sky and in this video I'm going to show and explain to you how to use variables inside Unreal Engine. This is the first video of the beginner tutorial series. In this series I'm gonna teach you how to make games from scratch on your own. So, like I mentioned at the start, in this video we are gonna talk about variables. So, what are variables? Variables are basically pieces of information. They store data that you input into them. This data can be number, text, coordinates, and so on. They are very commonly used. If you are making a game, you're gonna be using them every day for almost everything. So let's just learn how to create them. I'm in third-person template in Unreal Engine 5, as you can see. I'm gonna go into third-person folder, into blueprints, and then I'm gonna open third-person character blueprint. This is the base one. On the left side here, you can see that there is variables tab. Now when I click on the plus symbol next to it, I just created a variable. You can now name it whatever you want, so I'm gonna call this one just boolean, because by default it's of type boolean. As you can see, on the left side we have name, on the right side we have the type. When you click on it, now you can change the type of the variable. There is a lot of different types of variables and you are gonna learn all about them over the course of the series. For now, I'm just gonna talk about the most commonly used ones, which are these ones for the most part, and how to utilize them. So, before you do anything with your newly created variable, you need to compile your blueprint, otherwise you can't input the default value. So, once you created a variable, now you can drag it into your graph. You can now either get it or set it. So I'm gonna do both here. And as you can see, they look very different from one another. This one is the one we got when you press get. And what it serves is you literally get the value of your variable. You can then use it to plug it into, for example, a branch, which is quite commonly used with Boolean type variables. Set, on the other hand, is quite literally you are setting a variable, so you are changing the value of that variable inside the graph. Now, I'm gonna delete this, and I'm gonna teach you how to use branch real quick to explain how Boolean works. So, Boolean basically has a set value, and the value is a statement of true or false. As you can see here, there is a box that you can tick. If it's unticked, it's false. If it's ticked like this, it means it's true. So if I compile this here to put it into perspective, now this boolean variable is always gonna be true unless we change it with a blueprint or somewhere a bit later on, but that's not gonna happen because this is just overview of this. Now when we plug it into branch splits it and decides on what path it's gonna go from there. So if we create a new node, like let's say print string, and we plug it into false, it wouldn't actually do anything if it was a real code, because our boolean is true, which means it would go this way where there is nothing, so the print string wouldn't fire off. However, if we plugged it into true and boolean is true, then it would go that way. Pretty simple stuff, right? So, with the boolean explained, let's talk about some other ones which are substantially less confusing, I believe. So the next type that we can do, I'm gonna create a new variable for this, like this. Let's call it just new variable. And the next one is byte, integer 64, and float. All four of these are numerical based variables. That means you put numbers in them. Now, the reason why there is 4 different variables for numbers is because they all serve different purposes. For example, byte here, you can input 0 to 255. If I try and type in 260, it's gonna reduce it to 255, which is a really small range. But the reason why the range is small is because you don't really use this to input numbers. You use it to work with other stuff like enumerations and so on, which is much more complicated stuff that I'm not gonna go over right now. But basically, you just use it to input numbers from 0 to 255, and then use it in conjunction with other stuff. Next we have integer. Integer works similarly, you just input numbers such as, let's say, 5. However, what's different about integer from most of the other numerical ones is that you can only put in whole numbers. You can't use, let's say, 5.5 because it's not a whole number. For that, if you want to use numbers like 5.5, you can use float, which is the next one that I'm gonna talk about. Float is quite literally another one. You put in number, that's it. It's quite simple, but the advantage here is that you can actually put not the whole numbers like 5.6 and so on. You can see that I skipped one, which is integer 64. The reason why I kinda skipped it is because integer and integer 64 is the exact same thing. The only difference between 64 and a regular integer is because regular integer has a cap of negative 2.4 billion or so number, and then it goes all the way up to the same number in positive, whereas integer 64 has much wider range. But unless your game deals with literally billions in a single number, or in numbers in general, then you are never gonna use integer 64, and that's a very rare case when it is actually used. So that's the difference. Let's talk about the next section, which are these three: name, string, and text, and these are text-based variables. So name and text are pretty much self-explanatory. Name is used to name stuff, string is used to input text into it, and text is also used to input text into it. So what's the difference, you might ask? Well, the real difference between string... Hey, so I made a small mistake when I was describing a string variable here, so I'm just gonna quickly explain it again, so I don't have to re-record everything. So basically the difference between string variable and, for example, text variable is that the string can be searched, can be modified, and also can be compared to each other, unlike text, for example, or the name. So for example, like you can see on the screen, I'm plugging string into the print string node, which is a very common thing because string doesn't usually end up with the end user, like your players, for example. So that's basically the difference, is that strings are used primarily internally while you are building the game, but you won't come across them too often unless you are making large projects. Usually if you are making smaller indie games, you won't use them that much, but it's good to know. So yeah, let's get back to the video. Mentioned it. The difference between text and other ones is that text has one unique property, which is localization purposes. Unreal Engine has built-in localization system that helps you localize your game to other languages. So if I have this variable, for example, and I'm gonna type in hello and compile. Now I have this flag here. What this basically is, I'm not gonna go over how to exactly use it, but you can then take this variable and flag it for localization, which means when you, for example, you want to make a game that's both in English and maybe your own language, like Spanish or something that you are more familiar with. You can do that through the localization, and you can flag all the text-based variables to be in that localization system. So when you are localizing for it, it's gonna be much smoother, much easier experience. Well, I believe that covers the text-based ones, and let's move on the last category, which is vector, rotator, and transform. These deal with 3D space for the most part, and objects themselves. So let's create a new variable, and I'm gonna call it vector, and set it, of course, to the type of vector. Now, what vector is, it's basically a coordinate in 3D space. So we have x, y, and z coordinates. When I go to the map here, for example, and you see like the cube here, or this one, this cube is gonna have certain properties. It's gonna have location, like you can see here, for example. This serves for the game to know where everything is, obviously. So vector can be used to either copy or input, just generally input honestly, the coordinates into the variable and either store them or change them. For example, if you want to maybe make a blueprint that takes this cube from here and moves it all the way to here when player steps on a pressure plate or something. Together with that, we also have rotator, which I'm gonna quickly create. And a rotator does also have these three coordinates. However, instead of dealing with location itself, it deals with the rotation of the object. So is it rotated like this? Or maybe is it rotated like this? Pretty self-explanatory, I think. And then the last one is transform. Now transform is a bit bigger in the sense that transform really encapsulates everything about the objects, like all these three things: location, rotation, and scale. So if we create a node, which is basic, let's say make transform, we are creating basically the variable here with the node instead of just creating the variable by default. Now you can see I can take the vector, get it, rotator, get it, and then just plug it in, and it's gonna be working just fine. But then we have scale. Well, scale doesn't really have dedicated variable to it, but you can actually use the vector because it has the same format and plug it in as well. And you are creating transform. So transform is basically just comprised of location, rotation, and scale. And it's most commonly used with this node, which is spawn actor from class. As you can see, this allows us to pick any actor in the project you want, and then spawn it inside the board at your will, wherever you want. But to know where to spawn it, we need the transform, and that's why we use it. However, as you can see, if I just right click the spawn transform pane, I can split it into location, rotation, and scale. So you don't always need to make transform, for example. You can just plug it in like this. Now that pretty much covers all the base ones, but there is still one more that I want to talk about, which is object-based variables. Now object-based variables are way more complicated, and I'm not gonna get much into them because I think in order to actually explain them properly and how they can be utilized, they just need their own video. But in short, what they are used for is they are primarily used for references. So for example, I'm in third person character, right? So what I can do is I can make reference variable and I can just look up the exact blueprint I'm in. So I go bp underscore third person, it's right here on top, and then object reference. And now we created a reference to that character. And then we can drag it in. And I'm gonna show you an example. Let's say we are gonna create custom event and we are gonna call it a third person event. What we can then do from this reference, if we drag off from it, we can call that event. Now obviously these are in the same blueprint right now, but if you created this reference inside a different blueprint, you could still use it to access this blueprint and call that event from it. However, doing it this way would result in an error and it probably wouldn't work most of the time. So like I said, it's more complicated. I'm not gonna get too much into it, but basically object-based variables, they effectively represent whatever you input into them, whether it's an actor, it's a blueprint, it's a static mesh, skeletal mesh, and so on. And that's what they are effectively used for, as references. So I believe that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe and everything like that. And let me know in the comments about what kind of guides and tutorials would you like to see in the future. And yeah, thanks for watching. See ya. Hey guys, so I'm editing this video as you can see, and I decided to make like a cheat spreadsheet for you of different types of variables that I went over and like a really short description to them. So I'm gonna put a link in the description and you can check it out, you can download it and have it on your hand whenever you need it. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Thanks for watching. See ya.